You don't really notice the system until it stops working. It's kind of like plumbing. You don't wake up every morning feeling grateful for pipes. You don't journal about them or build an identity around them. They're just there doing their job until one day you flush and suddenly your bathroom becomes like a conceptual art installation about regret. That's sort of what economic collapse feels like. One day you're going to work and pretending the emails matter, the meetings matter, pretending that 5-year plan you wrote half drunk at midnight means something. And the next day, the floor drops out, and not drastically, but just a slow, bureaucratic realization that the promises aren't coming back. So the job's gone, the savings evaporated, the ladder you were climbing turns out to be leaning against nothing. And this is the moment where the panic hits. And being broke isn't even the worst of it, because the deeper wound is realizing that you organized your entire identity around a system that used you and just saw you as disposable. Because the establishment did its best to assure us this couldn't happen. I mean, we were warned about personal failure, laziness and bad choices, but not the systemic failure. Not the we built a machine that eats people and occasionally runs out of fuel. So when it collapses, you don't just lose money, you also lose meaning. And this is important because it's debatably impossible to rebuild a society without a sense of meaning.
Hey, there's a growing realization among white Americans that they have helped build a system that is now consuming them. And for the longest time, for many decades, Black Americans tried to warn everyone about something which is happening right now. And they saw through it because Black Americans, this is a lived experience. This is something that they have gone through. This is something that they have seen firsthand, first generation from their forefathers. The conditions that right now white people are going through. There's so much disillusionment that is happening in the United States. There's so much greed. There's so much hypersexuality. There's so much, hyper-consumerism. And that's what the United States is trying to push to its citizens. But in all this, people see something called emptiness. People are learning that all these things are superficial, and people are now yearning for a quality life. People are looking forward for a life without putting value into a monetary system, without putting value into shiny things. Things that are pricey. People are starting to see life outside that. And I think this is just an important conversation that we need right in 2026, where we are just starting. One of the most profound things that white Americans learned is that they helped build a system that really milked them, milked everything out of them. And now they're coming out with the hard lessons, and they're learning. When the systems wants to take everything, don't give those things value. Start to see life in a different way. Start to appreciate the small things. The small things like you have a roof over your head. Because having a roof over your head right now in the United States is becoming so much hard. So much evictions are happening. So it helps people to appreciate the little things that matters. Family, having a roof over your head. You have clean water. You can have, all those things that you value. You just need a car that can move. Because people are learning that greed, which is driving the United States, is making them go in shambles. But at the end of the day, they're the ones that build the system. They're the one that fed the monster. But now the monster is feeding right onto them. So let's watch the video. I'll be back with my thoughts and commentary regards to this. I'm your number one host and presenter, H-Tech Stories. And if you watch me for the first time, I'm asking you to please subscribe to the channel, join the membership, and really get to see what I can offer you. Let's get it. I'll be back. This video belongs to Functional Melancholic, is the one who shared all this important information. So poetic, so much important. So let's get into the video. I'll be back with my thoughts and commentary.
So we're told that our purpose comes bundled with participation in the system. You show up, you perform, and you contribute, and in exchange, you get a sense of stability and direction. Basically, you get a vague but comfortable feeling that you're on track, even if you don't really know what that means or where it's going. Then suddenly, there is no track. And people call this nihilism or a crisis of competence or whatever. And yeah, it might be those things from a certain perspective, but it's more accurately withdrawal. Because you've been unplugged from a narrative you didn't realize you were completely dependent on. This world is built on a sense of purpose that is outsourced to careers, outsourced to productivity, to numbers on screens that promise future peace if you just keep plugging away. So economic collapse doesn't just remove those structures, it exposes them for what they are. It reveals how much of what we called meaning was actually just motion and a bunch of distraction. A socially approved way to stay busy until retirement or death, whichever one comes first. And when that motion stops, people freak out. And they say things like, well, what the hell do I do now? Which is an honest question, but it's also a revealing one. Because what they're really asking is, who or what exactly am I if I'm not useful to the machine? And I think that's the real crisis here. It's not scarcity so much as a deep identity loss. So we didn't just lose income, we lost the whole script. That would be the one that said, work hard and be patient, delay joy, and eventually the universe will Venmo you fulfillment. But wouldn't you know it, it turns out the universe doesn't use Venmo. I mean, it barely uses emails. So now we're standing in the wreckage and holding resumes that may as well be paper airplanes at this point, wondering why none of this feels heroic. And wondering why collapse feels less like an ending and more like some awkward silence where everyone realizes the party wasn't actually fun to begin with. But here's where I would suggest that the uncomfortable truth might be that a lot of us were miserable before the collapse. I mean, we were already anxious and medicated and burned out, quietly resentful, probably spiritually exhausted. We just had better furniture and a sense of forward momentum to distract us from all of that. So it's fair to say that the system didn't really give us meaning. It just numbed the question. But collapse removes the anesthetic. And once that numbness wears off, you feel everything. You're going to feel the grief, the anger, the shame, relief, and buried underneath all of it, something strange and probably dangerous. Freedom. And I'm not talking about the Instagram kind. I'm not the quit your job and move to Bali kind. This is the uncomfortable kind. This is the kind of freedom that asks you who you are when no one is watching or paying or promoting or measuring you. So when the system dies, it stops telling you what matters, and that silence can be terrifying. But it's also the first honest moment most people have had in their adult lives. Because for the first time, meaning isn't actually assigned to you. It isn't deferred or promised later on if you behave well. I mean, for the first time, you actually have to decide what your life is for. And I think this is where things get interesting. All right, so after the system collapses, there's this strange mourning period that nobody talks about. It's not the obvious grief like going broke or loss of stability and options. That stuff gets the headlines. What people don't talk about is the more discreet loss, the death of the useful version of you, the version that had a function. Because for most of our lives, usefulness has been mistaken for worth or value. If you could generate income and meet deadlines, answer emails quickly, tolerate horrendous fluorescent lighting, and nod at stupid phrases like circle back, you were considered a reasonably successful human. Maybe not happy, but acceptable. But then collapse hits, and suddenly no one needs that version of you anymore. And it's not that your skills just vanish. It's that the demand does. Your resume becomes like a historical document. It might be interesting, but it's no longer actionable. And unintentionally, you find yourself asking dangerous questions like, well, if nobody needs me, do I still matter? This isn't narcissism, it's conditioning. Because basically, we trained people to be tools and then acted shocked when they emotionally fell apart after being discarded. Is anybody surprised by this? We were prioritizing teaching market relevance instead of meaning. And market relevance is temporary by design. So when your usefulness ends, people naturally feel hollow, even gutted, because they're directionless and they feel secretly ashamed about it all. And it isn't because they failed, it's because the measuring stick disappeared. There's a particular humiliation in no longer being needed by the machine because it feels personal, even though it isn't really. It's like being dumped by someone who insists it's not you, it's capitalism, while they actively ghost you. And not surprisingly, that humiliation is going to turn inward. So people start blaming themselves, as if anyone can meaningfully prepare for the collapse of the story that they were just born into. The truth is that most of us didn't choose this framework. We inherited it. And you grow up absorbing this steady message that your life only has value if it produces something measurable and profitable. No one ever really asks this directly. It's ubiquitous. It's in how we ask kids what they want to be when they grow up, and it's in how adults introduce themselves. It's also in how unemployment feels like a confession rather than a circumstance. So when the system dies, it doesn't just take your income, it takes your introduction. And suddenly you don't know what to say when somebody asks, so what do you do? That question becomes unbearable because you realize, it makes you realize how often you used an answer to avoid having a personality. And without that role, you're left with just the raw material, the unmarketable parts, basically the things you liked but never monetized, the values you postponed, the curiosity that didn't pay well enough to justify attention. But what happens is collapse forces you to sit with that person. And at first, you don't like them. It is very uncomfortable. That person feels inefficient and unfocused, maybe a little sad. They don't wake up with urgency anymore. They don't know how to justify their existence in bullet points. And that's when people panic and rush to rebuild the same cage just under a different name. Hustle culture collapses and reincarnates as resilience. And productivity apps become like spiritual practices. Everybody's suddenly reinventing themselves, which mostly means they're just trying to stay legible in a system or to a system that already moved on. But there is another option that's a little quieter. You can let the so-called useful self die. It doesn't have to happen melodramatically, just a slow, uncomfortable acceptance that you are not here to justify your oxygen consumption without or with output. And that is a radical thought in a culture obsessed with optimization. And yeah, it's going to feel wrong at first. It feels lazy, maybe even dangerous, because it's like you're one bad decision away from becoming invisible forever. But invisibility does have its perks. Because when you are no longer being constantly evaluated, you can finally hear yourself think. You're finally being given an opportunity for some real self-awareness. Maybe you start noticing how much of your previous motivation was just based on fear. Fear of falling behind or being left out. Fear of just being nothing. And then collapse comes along and eliminates the race altogether. And suddenly you realize you never actually liked competing in the first place. And this is where grief turns into something else. It's not necessarily optimism or hope. It's something more grounded, like a strange sense of relief, but it's mixed with terror. Because if your worth isn't tied to usefulness anymore, then meaning has to come from somewhere else, and that's both a burden and a gift. It means you can't hide behind productivity anymore. But it also means your life finally belongs to you. And once that realization actually sinks in, the collapse stops feeling like a punishment and more like a reckoning. Okay. So after all the panic and the grief and the identity hangover, something subtle starts to happen. You begin the process of detox. And it isn't pretty. There's no juice cleanse for this or a retreat. It's more like you're realizing you've been humming the same irritating tune your entire life. And now that the radio's off, you can finally hear the ringing in your ears. And that ringing basically translates to the absence of instructions. It's essentially the absence of the brainwashing. Because the system didn't only organize our labor, it also organized our thinking. It told us what mattered, what counted, what was respectable, what was embarrassing, what was a waste of time, and so on. And collapse removes the authority, but it doesn't remove the conditioning. So at first, without the system, you keep trying to please it. So you still feel guilty when you try to take a rest, and you still feel anxious when you're not constantly hustling. You still measure your days by productivity, even though no one's really collecting the data anymore. So that's the process of deprogramming. It's the slow realization that a lot of your inner voice isn't actually you. It's a corporate training video that learned how to whisper. And we have this tendency to confuse that voice with ambition or discipline or responsibility. But if you listen closely, you'll hear that it mostly consists of fear. It's just dressed up in adult language. What if I waste my potential? What if this is all I ever become? And a collapse isn't going to erase those thoughts. It just exposes how absurd they are when there's nothing left to chase anymore. So behind all that noise, there's a deeply uncomfortable truth that most of us were never actually choosing our lives. We were selecting from the approved options, customizing the cage, picking which flavor of exhaustion felt the most dignified. And so when that cage collapses, we don't immediately feel free. We feel lost and we feel scared. Because freedom without direction feels like standing in an open field after living your whole life in various contained spaces. And suddenly there's space everywhere. It's overwhelming, and there's no instructions. There's no reassurance that you're doing anything right. And that's when people react by reaching for meaning like it's a replacement system. So understandably, they want a new ideology and a new identity, and they want something to tell them what to do next. This is how collapse can breed extremism and toxic positivity and cult thinking and this hyper optimistic nonsense that insists everything is an opportunity. I mean, look, sometimes a disaster is just a disaster, but it's also an interruption, because collapse interrupts the momentum that kept us from asking questions we didn't want to answer. Questions like, do I actually like how I'm living? Do I believe the things that I repeat? Do I want less? Or have I just been told to want more? And when the system is functioning, these questions, well, those questions are going to be inconvenient. But when it fails, those kinds of questions are unavoidable. So you start noticing how much of your stress was coming from imaginary futures that required constant upkeep. How much, you notice how much energy that you spent maintaining the appearance of being on a so-called track, and how many dysfunctional things you tolerated simply because they had been normalized. Collapse doesn't promise to make life easier, but it does simplify it. So the menu shrinks, the distractions thin out, the stakes become more honest, survival matters again, but so does presence. You can't autopilot your way through uncertainty. And that's where something unexpected happens. You start really paying attention or redirecting your attention. And it isn't because it's mindful or spiritual or trending or whatever. It's because there's nothing else to do. You notice time differently, and the conversations seem to last longer. Small routines start carrying more weight. Maybe you realize how much of your previous life was just spent preparing for some future that just kept moving the finish line. And now that future is totally unreliable, which means the present finally gets your attention. This is the part no one advertises. Collapse strips away false urgency. So without deadlines imposed by institutions, you begin to see how many emergencies were just like preferences and suits, and how many of those now or never moments were actually not really that important.
So you understand that there is a deep realization among white Americans that they have helped build a system that is now consuming them. And we can understand that this is something which we can term it as a structural reckoning rather than just a personal guilt. Because for decades, United States was organized around a model that prioritized profit maximization, expansion, and dominance, which often justified through ideas of exemptionalism and endless growth. This machine, made up of financialization, corporate consolidation, and political capture, cultural commodification, was initially experienced by white Americans as beneficial or at least tolerable because racial hierarchy, um, because racial hierarchy insulated them from its harsh consequences. As that insulation weakens, the systems now produces precarity, exhaustion, and loss of those who once believed themselves to be protected. So, at the center of all this crisis that is happening, there is unchecked greed. Yes, there is somebody which is benefiting from all this chaos, the top 1% of the United States. Institutionalized through neoliberal economic policy, the pursuit of profit above all else hollowed out manufacturing towns, eroded labor protections, and turned essential services like healthcare, housing, and education into commodities. While Black and other marginalized communities felt these effects firsthand and most severely, white Americans are now confronting the same dynamics: stagnant wages, crashing debt, job insecurity, and disappearing futures for their children. What feels new to them is not exploitation itself, but the loss of racial buffering that once softened its impact. So, which is something which is closely tied to the culture of greed, is what we call hyper-consumerism. Not just consumerism, but hyper-consumerism, which replaced meaningful social life with endless consumption. Americans were encouraged to define success through acquisition rather than stability, community, or well being. For white Americans, consumerism once offered once offered the illusion of control and status. And the real economic power shifted upwards. So, as living costs rise and wages lag behind, this illusion collapses. The machine now demands constant participation, more work, compete more, while offering less security in return, creating a sense of being trapped in a system that no longer delivers on its promises. Another defining feature of this systemic failure is the erosion of normal life. This totally changed everything. People don't want to have kids in the United States today. People don't want to just take responsibility. But at the same time, I don't blame them, because it is the conditioning of the society that they are in which is making them be the way they are. Now, we're talking about stable employment, affordable housing, strong public schools, and accessible healthcare, which was once considered basic expectation, are now increasingly out of reach. Communities that once thrived on predictable routines and intergenerational continuity, which are marked by transcience isolation, and decline. For many white Americans, this erosion is especially disorienting because it contradicts the narrative that the systems was built to serve them indefinitely. The breakdown of everyday life exposes the machine as indifferent to identity, which once profitable and efficiency take precedence. So, all this reality has produced widespread disillusionment, not only with the government, but with the idea of America itself. Faith institutions, media, politics, religion, and even family structures as weakened as people recognize how deeply captured these systems are by corporate and elite interests. White Americans are increasingly confronting the fact that loyalty to the system did not guarantee dignity or protection. The sense of betrayal stems from the realization that the machine was never designed for collective flourishing, but for extraction of labor, attention, resources, time, normal life. Name it all. People are sacrificing their lives just to have a bread in their mouth, right? So, importantly, this awakening is not occurring in a moral vacuum. Many Black scholars and communities have long described America as a machine that consumes human life for profit, power, and control. What is different now is what is being consumed visibly and in large numbers. As white Americans experience declining life expectancy, rising addiction, mental health crisis, and social fragmentation, they encounter conditions that were once dismissed as marginal or exceptional. So this convergence reveals that systems violence was never selective. It was simply unevenly distributed. So you get to understand that people are coming to a realization that the life that they have been living has never been normal. So I get a look at into the video that Functional Milconic talked about, and people said something that, I believe that, damn, I believe that we should talk about. Now, somebody came and say that, um, as a 45-year-old who had a career nor ever wanted one, I can tell you how sick and tired I am when the first second question from someone I just met is, what do you do? People here in the States judge others by their occupation and not who they are as human beings. This is one of the litany of examples why I avoid people. Somebody said that I'm convinced we live in some Truman Show or Dark City kind of reality where somehow they are able to get some people to go through a collapse while having others barely notice a thing. Someone just said that my laziness and bad choices have prepared me for this time. I'm right at home in the low-grade chronic sense of disappointment and regret that the lingua franca at this moment in history I've been preparing for my life, for my whole life. Some will also say that my 21-year-old son lives with me in my century-old farmhouse. We'll be together forever, probably. During our many long talks about the reality unfolding right now, I tell him sometimes, living close to the ground, right, is now good practice for huge downgrade in lifestyle coming for everyone. We are not ready, but we are watching it crash towards us. Somebody also said that it's interesting that we as a culture talk so much about losing human connection, the importance of having actual values, but also elect narcissists to public office and have normalized labeling themselves as products, as brands in 2025, what a cognitive dissonance has become a very impact, non-contact sport. So I really don't know how to say this. Okay, somebody's saying that for some reason, at 73 years old, now I've never been asked what I do for an occupation. And no, I don't live in a bubble. When I do get into a conversation about jobs, people really scratch their heads with me because I graduated college and became a chemical engineer for 1 year, realizing corporate world was not for me. I became a carpenter, really enjoyed the autonomous situation. If you do your job right, you'll never get hassled. Now, very comfortable, retired. I let the world go by one day at a time. So, brothers and sisters, people are reclaiming their life, and this is a moral reckoning, right? People are getting to see life beyond just flashy cars because flash is trap. Please, brothers and sisters, allow me to leave this video at this point, and please let me know what you think about this video. I'm gonna be back with my thoughts and commentary in regards to this. Not really, but I'm used to say that, but let me see you in my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.